Act as well, and of course, I think it should cause all of us some alarm that the exclusive privilege is of the central government, which is what is being stated now in the Telegraph Act amendment. So with all of these remarks from the panel, before we go to the keynote address by Justice Chelameshwar, I'm going to open the floor for a few questions if if anyone would like to ask a couple of questions, and then we will request the panelists to respond before we finally request Justice Chelameshwar. Yes, please introduce yourself, and if there is someone that you would like them to, specifically.
I'm Nanda from Delhi. Regarding Mr. Apar Gupta, what he said that transparency and all these technical things. I live in Raigada in Koraput, Odisha for 10 years.
Use the mic,
in
gentlemen.
2000,
Use the mic.
Sorry. In 2000, when the telephone bill used to come, the bill with 3 to 4 pages with every details, it used to come. So I don't think there is lack of any transparency or any anything else. Transparency is there. This is my personal experience. I don't want to comment upon it. This is a platform to express one's views, not to argue with anyone. Thank you.
Not sure there was a question contained. Good. Yeah. If anyone has a question here, yeah. Paranjoy. Questions and then.
I have a question which is at one level personal in nature, but it's also a matter of public interest. I would like Mr. Prakash Singh, if he can give me some advice. I'm soliciting his advice. Approximately almost 2 years ago, I was told that my phone, this one, had been allegedly compromised by Pegasus. Today I learned from the Financial Times that there's a new software called Predator, which the government of India is allegedly contemplating buying. So what does me as a citizen of this country do when the Solicitor General of India tells the Chief Justice of India that I will neither confirm nor deny a question that you're asking? Because the Chief Justice, the then Chief Justice, Mr. Ramana, he said, please tell us whether a government agency has bought it or not. He neither says yes nor no. And then we learn from the same Chief Justice before he debates office that the government did not cooperate with a committee that was set up by the Supreme Court. So what does me as an ordinary citizen do under the circumstances?
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, the gentleman next to Aranjoy, and then we'll come to you. Yeah.
Thank you for very provocative, very interesting discussion. My name is P.K. Vijayan. I teach English at Hindu College. I had a couple of comments and really not really questions. It struck me that the point that we need to focus on is in some senses even prior to surveillance, and that's actually the perception that the state has of the citizen as an insurgent citizen. And that's where everything begins, that the citizen is not to be trusted, but the citizen is expected to trust the state implicitly. So the entire surveillance mechanism, the motive to put in place a surveillance mechanism begins from that premise, that there is something to be monitored with this deviant or potentially deviant subject. I think that's an issue that needs to be attended when we look at questions of surveillance. The second thing that I wanted to touch upon briefly is what Mr. Apar Gupta had mentioned in the example of the CCTV cameras being brought in and then dismissed in court as being vague. It seems to me that technology is being used more as a kind of fig leaf that we have this and therefore we are entitled to arrest. So the intention to arrest is already there, and the motive and the prejudice that drives that arresting procedure is already there even before the CCTV and the record that comes from the CCTV. So I'd like to just place that on the floor.
Thank you. There was a question there, and okay, then 2 questions here, and then we'll stop. So.
Hi, thanks. My name is Prateek. I'm an MA student. I study history. And thanks a lot for the discussion. And I mean, my question is a more general one because I think everyone kind of touched upon aspects of it. One was that, of course, you know, these kind of casual attitudes towards surveillance of this attitude of, you know, hota hai, that's also very much replicated in how I think many people normally feel about common police practices of, like someone mentioned of, you know, checking the phones or, for example, taking bribes or just common forms of police brutality might be a strong word, but, you know, everyday forms of kind of police violence, perhaps. And I think someone also mentioned that perhaps it's kind of the police system which needs more sort of fundamental reform there as a way to tackle also questions about rethinking surveillance. And yeah, I would just like to kind of pose that question about how do we, you know, answer this perhaps larger question of why do people seem to be so casual and rather, you know, nonchalant about what the police does, and there seems to be a general tolerance for abuses of the police, and, you know, what might explain that?
Thanks.
Good evening, ma'am. My question is from Professor Ruchi Sinha. So I have actually 4 questions, ma'am, and sorry I haven't formulated that much. So my first question is that during that Amrit Kal budget 2023, when Nirmala Sitharaman, she has said that India being the knowledge, technology-driven and knowledge-driven economy. So, ma'am, when the Elon Musk project of Starlink, which is going to be broadcast and launched in December 2023, and what you are like expecting and seeing the scenario about the surveillance? Okay. My second question is about, like you told us that one need to stop relying and like uninstalling the apps. So being a research scholar coming from Center for Dalit and Minority Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia. So how can we do that? Because like everything is being available on the internet. And my third question is that about, you talked about Foucault, he talked about the disciplinary society. So, ma'am, it's like just a comment, like technology is being governed as a liberation for the humankind. Okay, it's not the problem with the internet. That's how we are actually using that, how we are encoding that, performing that, like particularly depending on us. So it's not the problem with the internet, rather like how we are doing that. And ma'am, my last question is that, India being the second largest user of internet, approximately 4 billion after China. So ma'am, it's become a huge market basically. So, and also the various cyber feminists are complying that, that it has become a female space who force the positive to productive relationship with the machine. So ma'am, how you like comment on to that perspective? Thank you so much, ma'am.
Last question here. I'm afraid we don't have time.
Sorry, just a small question. It is also to Ruchi ma'am. While talking on dichotomy between big tech and state, while we can always pressurize state through protest and political movement, how do you regulate big tech? Does not transnational nature puts a challenge to it? So that dichotomy actually is not a dichotomy in itself because of so many states involved in it. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question here, please, if you can pass on the mic.
Hello, my name is Arun. So we did, my question is to Mr. Appagupta and Prakash Singh. So you have mentioned about state surveillance being pervasive and its unchecked power which they have on intercepting phones and all. So what is the solution? Everybody wants to know what is the solution. Is it legal? Is it technological? Or is it the people movement to claim their right? So if the solution is about the judicial oversight when we are talking about interception, what is the nature of judicial oversight which works best in any other country, and we are thinking to adopt it? Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to now request the panelists to please respond. If everyone could take about 2 to 3 minutes. I think they're very rich set of questions here, and I realize that it's a challenge to answer them briefly. But Apar, can we start with you, and we'll go this way.
First, like to thank the person from Odisha who stated that there's transparency as per his own opinion in surveillance practices. I really do think that opinions which differ from mine need platforms and help enrich the discussions. I mean this sincerely, and I think more should be invited in this conversation. It helps strengthen the legitimacy of whatever we do say and what we learn together. Secondly, with respect to the question that are these structural problems which are there with policing, and what is the role which technology is playing, I think what I didn't build upon a little bit more was that technology, the way I view it, is that it's not changing in terms of changing value systems and institutions. It's sometimes even deepening the existing ones which are there. And the private sector here plays not only the role of a contractor, but also it joins with the public sector in gathering more data, because it's gathering more power over individuals. And this is very important to understand from what we are learning about how increased amount of data capture by the private sector actually is sometimes sold to governments for money, purely for money. In fact, in the telecom bill pre-consultation, India's top telecom providers have asked the Department of Telecom to pay it to conduct surveillance. Yes, and this has also been reported. It's there. It's as per RTI. It's an official thing. So this is a very direct financial incentive, but financial incentives in terms of gathering more data on individuals, ordinary Indians, is there both from the private and the public sector. And which brings me to the final response in terms of what are the solutions in this. I think this is a broad problem. This is an economic problem, this is a social problem, this is a legal problem, this is an institutional problem. And the way I always think about solutions, I think what is possible given the capacity of today. And I think what is given the current capacity are very modest things which I'll suggest. This report needs to be an annual report. We need to, from this conversation possibly, hold more conversations. And I'll stop there. That is all the modest solutions I can propose today.
Thank you, Apar. Prakash Singh ji, if you could please respond.
There are three questions which I faced. One was yours, which has been answered by Apar very cogently. But I would only say that the solution is to place a system in place. Have a proper regulatory authority with appropriate oversight mechanisms, and the law should lay down the circumstances under which a person could be placed under surveillance, who will be the competent authority, for what duration, and whether that surveillance can be appealed against, and what use is made of that material. You see, the bill on the subject, which is still work in progress, that has to be a very comprehensive legislation which should, as I said, strike a balance between the need for privacy, which is a fundamental right as clarified by the Supreme Court, and the concern for security. We need to strike a balance between the two, and if there is intellectual honesty, that balance can be found. But unfortunately, I found that in all such cases, government finds ways and means to circumvent a situation, and every institution gets heavily loaded in favor of the government. That is what I have seen in the matter of police reforms also. But anyway, these are matters which need to be attempted, and let us hope that people who work on this do with a fair degree of intellectual integrity. Another question was about problems. Chalta hai in police, that this problem, that problem, taking bribe and arbitrary challans, and all kinds of problems. You see, police problems are in not hundreds but in thousands. But if I were to say generalize, I say there are mainly two approaches which are called for. See, one is in terms of capacity building, and the other is in terms of institutional reforms. Now, institutional reforms are going to be very problematic. Institutional reforms were mandated by the Supreme Court, but the state governments are not prepared to fall in line, and they have found 101 means, as I said, to circumvent the implementation of Supreme Court's directions. If you study the affidavits filed by the state governments, you will get an impression as if they are all in compliance of Supreme Court directions. But if you examine them minutely, you find that in letter and in spirit they have violated the directions of the Supreme Court. So that, institutional reforms are going to be problematic, and the struggle for institutional reforms will continue, I do not know for how many more years. But capacity building is a much easier thing. And this is, as I have always said, it's a low-hanging fruit. See, increasing manpower, now women power also, you can say personnel, human resource shortages. What is the difficulty? What is the difficulty? There are about 500,000 vacancies in the police across the country. Filling up you have a whole lot of unemployed manpower who can be sort of recruited, trained, and put on these jobs. So manpower, manpower includes womanpower, let me say. Manpower recruitments, that aspect can be easily taken care of. Then, we talked of CCTV's camera installation. See, CCTV camera installation, yes, it must be there. But let me tell you, we are an IT power. And yet, there are police stations without telephone, without mobile connectivity, without motor vehicles. And they are in remote areas. What do you expect? You see, when I joined service, there were police stations even without lockups. Now, fortunately, we have lockups. There are some police stations without lockups, so what they would do, they would take any window, attach a rope to it, and the other end of the rope was attached to the prisoner's leg. उसी खिड़की में बांध के रखते थे, क्योंकि lockup नहीं है. So all kinds of, this capacity building is, government is trying to improve upon, but there is still a lot of progress to be achieved in terms of forensic laboratories. We are very, very inadequate. And at any given point of time, let me tell you, here also the figures are not being given now. But 5-6 years back, the BPRD reports always gave the number of exhibits which are pending scientific examination. And I remember the last time I read the figures, it was about 160,000 exhibits. At any given point of time, they are lying unattended in the forensic laboratories because there's so much of area. So we need many more forensic laboratories, we need more transport, we need better communications, we need human resource requirements to be met, technology input. All these things can be, capacity building is, as I said, it is a work in progress, but still we have a lot to catch up. And this Chalta attitude has to be given up. Unfortunately, in this country, we talk of police reforms only when there is a scandal. Only when something goes seriously wrong in the law and order front that we talk of police reforms. If there is a false encounter in Hyderabad where 3 alleged rapists are killed, then the whole country talks about police reform and why this is not happening. But after that, we have a strange habit. When there is a crisis, we'll wake up and then again we go to sleep. Now, why should the states not be? Why should the public not build enough pressure to put on the state? Pressure on the states to implement the reforms mandated by the Supreme Court. Everybody wants to. They want to retain their stranglehold. It's monitoring. Nobody minds. Supervision. Nobody minds. But they want to retain their stranglehold over the police so that they are able to use it as an instrument of, you can say, oppression or an instrument to further their political agenda. That's the problem. But as I said, capacity building, that should go on, and police reforms should occupy the minds of the people, and everyone should talk about it and agitate for it, and not once in a while, but it has to be a systematic exercise until government concedes. Last point, but Mr. Paranjoy, frankly, your question, at the end of it you said, what do I do as a citizen? In fact, that is my dilemma also. I have nothing more to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Singh, very quickly.
As briefly as possible.
Professor Sinha, because there were a set of questions for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So a lot of questions we'll discuss over tea, but I'll start from the last question. Big tech and being transnational, I think you answered half of your question. The very fact that we are the biggest market Why can't we have control over these technologies? Because we are going to consume them. So where is the system where we can do some bartering? Why don't we have that right? Okay, now the larger order, that is the UN, the World Bank, and the ILO, why aren't we holding them accountable? So these are larger questions. Is it impossible? I would say no. Is it difficult? It is very, very difficult. So now we have to choose the difficult path. That's my answer to that. Regarding whether it's budget or whether it's medical access or whether it was our data for COVID vaccine, I have a problem with everything. Now, the reason being that anything that is technological, that means it's taking away your ability to think and to be able to negotiate. So being technology-driven, being Western-like, having the largest access digital footprint is not something we need to aspire for. We need to aspire for having the least amount of nutritional deaths, having maximum human rights, etc., etc. So technology is not as neutral a space as we think it to be, because your footprint is based upon what you're looking for, and that is why I keep telling my students or anyone, stop using digital newspapers, start using actual newspapers, because your news items are based upon what you're looking for. You need to understand the length and breadth of everything. Now, regarding the feminist space, I would say white feminist space, yes. Subaltern feminist space, no, because it's not neutral. It's based upon who is coding, and that is what I said, that unless until we start sensitizing the coders, and the coders go through a digitally appropriate understanding of the diverse identities and the diverse needs, internet is never going to be a safe space. And how do you reduce your dependence? If I had that answer, these digital companies would be paying me multi-million dollars. So I'm not in a position to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very rich discussion, and a big thank you to all the panelists here. I think what we have seen is this very strong view from governments, and I'm not just talking about any one government, but certainly governments, and also something that we saw in the Puttasamy case when, when Aadhaar was the subject of litigation. When people were asking for the right to privacy, the government said, well, that is not a fundamental right. And yet, when it comes to people seeking information, the government doesn't shy away from hiding behind the right to privacy and saying information on assets, on liabilities, on many other things can't be provided because there is the right to privacy. So, educational degrees, yes. And I think it does feed the perception that somebody talked about, that it's almost as if citizens in a democracy who are actually supposed to be supreme and are sovereign can't be trusted. But the state can be trusted with all our information. And I think that this discussion today on surveillance has been very informative. And I think we are all waiting, and so without any further ado, I'm going to request Justice Chalameshwar to please speak to us and to deliver today's keynote address.
Good evening to everybody. At the outset, I came here only with the understanding that I may have to say something about surveillance. Data collection and data protection are a different aspect of the matter. When we talk about surveillance, the normal understanding is surveillance by the state and its agencies of citizens or a section of the citizens or individuals and their activities. And the report also broadly deals with that. Incidentally, in a gathering like this, allied subject like data protection, because a lot of private players get into this field. Before I say anything on this, as usual, in these matters, there is a lot of duplicity in this country, particularly among the people belonging to the ruling classes. I don't know how many of you remember today when the Aadhaar scheme was challenged, this whole judgment of Puttaswamy, and the question whether there is a fundamental right of privacy under the Constitution, arose in the context of a challenge to the Aadhaar scheme, which was a non-statutory scheme to start with, propounded by the previous political dispensation. The matter was lingering in the court for a few years, and eventually it was heard by a bench of 9 judges, of which I was one of them. At an earlier stage, when the matter was heard by a bench presided over by me, a very vehement submission was made by the then Attorney General, names may not be very relevant, saying that there is no fundamental right to privacy under the Indian Constitution. In support of the submission, an old 1964 judgment of 8 judges, one of those rare cases, normally Supreme Court very rarely sat in the last 75 years in benches of even numbers, barring 2 judges. Rest of them are 5, 7, 9, 13. Highest is the 13 so far, Keshwan. A few cases it so happened, but we are not concerned why it happened in this meeting. It was 8 judges' judgment. A stray sentence in that judgment was picked up, which did say that there is no fundamental right of privacy under the Indian Constitution. A stray sentence quoted out of context, a vehement submission was made. There is no fundamental right. Then the matter got referred to a larger bench. When the decision came, and at that stage, when the argument was going on, a lot of public opinion was sought to be generated by people who had association with the previous political regime which propounded this theory, bitterly opposing the scheme at a later point of time, though they had propounded it originally. Of course, finally when the judgment was delivered, the Supreme Court, by unanimous judgment, 9 judges declared that there is a fundamental right of privacy under the Constitution. Both the political organizations, please check up the papers of that period. Both the political parties and their respective spokespersons claimed that their stand stood vindicated. Both of them said that we supported the citizens' right of privacy. I hope, Apar, I am not wrong in that statement.
Sir, there's a PIB release. There's a Press Information Bureau official release still available which says that the...
Both the parties?
Yes.
Not only one part, both the parties said it. Government, not only this government, even people belonging to the previous government also said it. Now, the point is this. Everybody wants to have advantage of the public opinion and ride the crest of popularity. Forget it for the time being. As Ms. Prakash Singh was pointing out, surveillance and data collection existed from times immemorial. Mr. Prakash Singh picked up from Kautilya, quite an ancient thing. Well, if you want a slightly earlier starting point, Nowadays, it's good also to refer to those things. Take Ramayana. What was that whole episode of Rama sending Sita to exile? It was based on the information gathered by the spies of Rama. So this kind of an activity started from those days. It is nothing new. It's as old as human. It's not only in India, anywhere in the world. Wherever there is an organized state. Now, there are justifications for this. First reason is, human beings are not angels. None of us, barring few great souls like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or Ramana Maharshi, somebody like that, most 99% of us are personifications of rascality in different degrees. Some are 90% rascal, some are 80%, and some are 2%, or some are 5%. We are not angels. Therefore, there is a need for an organized state. The minute we have an organized state, the state has its own compulsions if it has to run it. If you recollect, when that Bombay incident took place, that Taj Hotel incident, lot of criticism saying that total intelligence failure. People are ready to criticize everything and every time. Yes, if you're talking about intelligence failure, obviously, tacitly you're approving intelligence collection is necessary in the country. I think it's a reality. This has always been an aspect of the state administration. Question is not, it is beyond debate. However much all of us shout here, sitting, reason out and propound theories, this activity of collection of data and surveillance by the state. Forget about, today I am not talking about collection of data by private players and the use or abuse of the data I am not going to talk about today. Insofar as the state and its actors are concerned, this activity has existed from times immemorial, ever since an organized state came into existence, and it will continue. And it's going to worsen for the simple reason, I'm a graduate of physics, of course. I was a very bad student, therefore I got into law. My dear friend Ramaswamy sitting here, he was in chemistry with me, the same batch, way back, half a century back, 1972, we passed out of the Madras Law College. But I still claim that I was a student of physics, though a very bad student. I'm sure some of you would have certainly read this book, titled 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Noah Harari. It came a few years back. He says, it will be difficult for us to imagine how this world is going to be in 2050. It will simply be impossible for us to imagine today. That's what he says. That is the theory. And he says the reasons are two. The rapid progress that is being made in artificial intelligence and biotechnology. These are the two factors which are going to change this world beyond all recognition. Unfortunately, I and Ramaswamy will not have to endure that pain because we would have gone by then. But all these youngsters sitting here will have to go through all this. Now, with this kind of state of affairs, progress of technology, this problem of surveillance becomes more and more intense. It is simply possible because all of us will be voluntarily contributing to this data, to this state. Forget about private parties. The minute we have a smartphone in your hand, the minute you operate the computer or pad or something like that, tablet, well, a lot of your information goes onto the net, and afterwards any intelligent man can access it. This is inevitable. The state also has its own reasons to collect data, and it has reasons to keep surveillance on certain classes of individuals or groups, depending upon the situation. Question is, notwithstanding the fact that the Supreme Court Constitution, the larger bench declared privacy to be a fundamental right, one basic principle of jurisprudence is no right in law is absolute. Every right comes with a corresponding obligation which imposes limitations on the rights. So is the right of privacy. Now, question is, when the state is collecting for whatever reasons and justifications, is there an amount of transparency in that process? Is the data being collected in a manner which can be examined and assess whether the data is meant really for the welfare of the people? Ultimately, any act of the state is required to be meant for the welfare of the people of the country. Now, whether a particular activity of the state, like surveillance or data collection, is really meant for the welfare of the people, for the security of the nation, welfare of the people in the context of each right has different tests and parameters, national security, decency, morality, depending on the nature of the right, the limitations are there in the Constitution. Now, whether this collection of information or keeping surveillance on individuals or organizations is really meant for the welfare of the country as a whole, the security of the state, honestly, is the question. Such an assessment is only possible if only we have a proper system and a law which regulates the keeping of the surveillance and collection of data regarding individuals by the state. Only then we would be able to make an assessment whether all this exercise is genuinely done for the benefit of the people or just to suit the political needs of people who are for the time being in power there. That is the purpose of asking for a proper system. In fact, one of the speakers was mentioning, when an application is made, I think Apar made this, application is made to the Home Secretary, how many things are there? The answer is, we don't disclose, and later said the information is destroyed. The reason is very obvious. Perhaps in good number of cases, the information is collected not perhaps in the interest of the larger interests of the society, but to suit the political convenience of whoever is. And it is nothing new to this country. I don't know how many of the younger generation people, they must have read, I don't know whether they have read it or not. People of my generation remember a scandal called Watergate scandal. What is this Watergate scandal about? It's the same thing. President Nixon authorized the surveillance of his opponents and their office, whatever it is. So this is a practice which went on and on in the human history. It will continue to go on. Now, are we, the people of India, in a position to bring the necessary democratic pressure on the governments? And my dear friends, I tell you here, when I talk about government, I don't talk about any political party. Whichever political party is in government, it's only the change in hardware. Software is the same. Everybody follows the same practices. Of late, we hear a lot of complaint about the abuse of governmental agencies, particularly the CBI. And the political party which is shouting hoarse at this misuse of CBI now managed this country for almost 40 years before that. They never bothered to put this CBI on any more stable and statutory and rational basis. Today they find it's the present dispensation is abusing it. Well, it's a matter of opinion. I am not going. But point is, if only we had a rational law dealing with the CBI organization, and when could CBI step in? What are the areas where the CBI could step in? We have a physical fight whether CBI could go into West Bengal or not. Virtually the local police of West Bengal, Mr. Prakash Singh, you remember that incident? local police of West Bengal and the CPA people clashed. And then matter went to the Supreme Court. This is another story that the Supreme Court didn't decide. That's a different matter. The question is this: can we, as a society, put the democratic pressure on the lawmakers of this country, the parliament or the state legislatures, to rationalize these practices and these institutions? There the question is, the numbers matter. As it was pointed out in this report read out earlier by Mr. Mukul, the opinions on the basis of the statistical data collected seems to be that a lot of people are not really worried about the collection of this kind of a data or surveillance because they don't understand, or it simply doesn't trouble them because they are not being put to surveillance. Nobody needs it. Who are put to surveillance by the state? People who are likely to create political trouble. Now, most of the common men in this country, actually they are the real makers of the political trouble because ultimately it's their vote which creates all the trouble for any political party. But then they are not taken into consideration. And so long as they don't realize the necessity to rationalize this pattern of information collection by the state, they are not made to understand the importance and relevance of the regulating this authority of the state to collect information. Nothing can be, of course, all these meetings and where people like all of us speak are looked at only as efforts to educate or inform the common man about the necessity to regulate these practices. To that only to that extent these meetings have some purpose. Ultimately, it is for the common man. It is the numbers in the electoral process which determine this. And some of these matters like data collection, your right of privacy, ultimately what is right of privacy? We are talking about CCTV cameras, surveillance in public places. Broadly speaking, I am not making an absolute anyway. Today what I say is not a law. Broadly speaking, that is a very, very, very minor aspect of the right of privacy because right of privacy ultimately is something personal. The minute we enter the public space, we are no more in a private area. Our right of privacy is very limited there. And the need of the state to collect information in that regard. See, all of us are used to, we accept without any question the presence of a policeman on a railway platform. What is the policeman doing there? Keeping surveillance on the events happening there on the railway platform or bus standing or any busy center of Delhi. Policeman keeps a watch. It's become a part of the system maybe for the last 200 years or so on, so we have come to accept it. Now technology is trying to slowly replace that physical supervision or surveillance by the police constable through the CCTV camera. It has very little to do with the right of privacy. Privacy ultimately is your own home. In law, there are three elements which describe privacy: sanctuary, repose, and intimate decision-making process. These are the three elements which constitute the legal right of privacy. Sanctuary means your own home, where you are absolutely free to, subject of course once again there, you can't indulge in activities which are hazardous or nefarious there. But then within the limitations of that legal parameters, an individual is entitled to the greatest degree of freedom within his residence. Similarly, intimate decision-making process is another aspect. What I eat, how I dress up, whom I marry or whom I don't want to interact with. These are all intimate decisions which constitute elements of privacy. These are areas. Now, the minute I go out into the street, what I am doing there in public is certainly open to the public gaze. CCTV camera is something which is installed by the state. Lakhs or thousands of people are watching me when I'm going it. If I can't have an objection for that, I can't stop it. It's nature. If I can't have an objection for that, I don't know why should there be any objection for a CCTV camera in a public place. On the other hand, state may have justifications to install those things to ensure. Well, one of the findings is the installation of CCTV cameras did not result in reduced crime. It is not the question is, the problem is not with the camera. The problem is how the data was utilized by the investigating agencies. If the investigating agencies did not make a proper use of the data collected through the CCTV cameras, they were not efficient enough to utilize the data, naturally crime rate would not come down. The trouble is not with the camera, but with the utilization of the data collected. So therefore, that is one aspect of the matter. The other thing is purely personal data, and then this tapping of the telephones or and things like that, or installing what do you call this electronic equipment in offices. Some time ago, I remember 2 senior cabinet ministers had a very unseemly quarrel a decade back, complaining that the office was bugged. Obviously, I'm not referring to the names. One is no more, and one is still available. So this kind of an activity, whether these are things which require, first of all, these things are objectionable unless established to be absolutely in the larger public interest. The establishment of such a fact that this activity is required in larger public interest depends upon the existence of verifiable data, recorded material, by the persons who are taking the responsibility or who are resorting to this kind of a surveillance. The requirement is to create such a legal regime. Unfortunately, as Mr. Apar was mentioning, the old Telegraph Act is being amended, and he mentioned to you, only the title changes, the content doesn't change. I was joking to my friend here. See, this is the progress we have made on the Amrita Mahotsav of Azadi. We have changed the name, but we haven't changed the content. 1875 to 2023. How many years is it, Apar? 150 years roughly?
Sir, I was a good law student, bad math student. Good law student, bad math student, sir.
So I think it is the requirement is more to exert the democratic pressure on the lawmakers to create more rational legal systems to regulate this kind of an activity in this country. I think for the time being, I think I'll stop here. I don't want to go any further into the matter. I congratulate the initiative taken today, and I thank the organizers for giving me this honor of releasing this report. Thank you all. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Justice Thalaimurai. That was very, very interesting. I think we have about 10 minutes in which we can take some questions which Justice Thalaimurai will request him to respond to. Yes, there are some questions at the back there. 2 questions. Can someone please take the mic there?
Hello, I'm Praveen Raj, a student of Media Governance from Jamia Millia Islamia University, Delhi. My question to Ruchi ma'am, you said there is a surveillance which is being done by the corporations every single time, every single minute. As a media scholar, we were trying to understand, even in our university lectures also, has there been a disaster shift in human behavior, not just from the technological side, but also from the human end, that we are completely exposed to it? We do not want to question anything, and we are very comfortable towards being surveilled every time. Could you just answer me, how do we resolve or how do we change this disastrous behavioral change in a human nature? I'm trying to understand from your point of view.
I'm going to request that the questions be directed at Justice Chelameshwar. But yes, thank you. I will ask Professor Sinha to also respond to that. But
Hi, my name is Gaurav. I am an advocate practicing in Delhi. I would like to point out to another aspect of the ubiquitousness of CCTVs. What has happened is that since there are CCTVs virtually every corner of the street now, the police has virtually given up on the actual investigating part. For example, recently when I was in Kanyakumari, my friend's mobile phone was snatched. And all that police was doing was just looking at all the CCTVs, and even the CCTVs, as Justice Chelameshwar pointed out, that the quality of the CCTV footage and the whole thing was so bad that even when we spotted the person who snatched the camera, we couldn't see the number of the car used, the face of the person. So we were so close and we couldn't get them. Plus, the police was virtually absolutely not interested to do the investigation in the era when there were no CCTVs. They were still doing their job, but now they're virtually refusing to do that and leaving it all to the CCTV cameras, which do not work. Thank you.
okay, yes.
Actually,
Yes.
I have a question for Justice Chelameshwar. I'm a journalist from Asar here. This is a question. Hello, yes. Am I audible enough?
Yes.
Right. So this is a question about. I'm trying to understand what is the recourse for citizens and journalists when you have a situation where the state refuses to put itself under any kind of check when the judiciary tries to keep a tab on its activities of surveillance, tech surveillance. For instance, I have in mind the Pegasus case here. Without going into details, my question is, what recourse do citizens and journalists have when the state refuses to answer any questions from the judiciary, from the topmost levels of judiciary, to transparency, even little bit of regulation for its activities, surveillance activities? I think I have made my question clear.
Shall we just take one or two more questions?
Sorry?
Shall we take one or two more questions?
Yeah, we'll take one by one.
Okay, fine. Yeah, that's fine.
If I understand your question rightly, because I'm aging, please remember, little difficulty in hearing. Now, if I understand your question rightly, or heard it rightly, what is the recourse a citizen has when the state refuses to respond to the commands of the judiciary?
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes. Is there any legal or public or
Well,
what recourse?
I have no answer for it. See, anything can work in a system which is created. And if the system itself is failing, there is nothing which you and I can do. Well, people will decide things in whatever way they can. That's right. Public opinion, how does it deal with the situation? One way public opinion can deal with the situation is at the time of the election. If the public are so convinced that the government is wrong, then vote them out. That is the only way it can happen. That's the whole democratic process. You have to create that awareness among the public. That's right.
There was a question from the gentleman
Yes,
there as well,
yes,
if you'd
yes.
like to respond to that.
Where?
He had asked about how the police has given up using its own powers in terms of investigation and left it to the CCTV footage, etc., which is not always of.
I don't completely agree that the police have given up. I suppose even if the data is recorded, some kind of an analysis of the data is required that can only be done by a human agency. Now, if what you mean by saying police are not interested or not doing anything, I don't know what you mean by that. Unless you expect the policeman to follow the old practice of taking the lathi, running after the man, and you know, rest of it I don't want to say. What happens, all of us know that. I mean, that is the only policing we know. Well, it's a very primitive way of dealing with things. Take advantage of the technology. It's a much better tool to prevent or even prevent crime or bring the criminals to justice. So as it is, I don't see any difficulty in the use of those CCTV cameras.
By giving them, I was not saying that I was saying that once they have got even a slight bit of hint that the person looks like this or the bike is, so because they did not get the number explicitly, they were saying now we cannot do anything. Instead of
No. See, I don't understand. See, therefore, what you should be asking is nothing to do with the police. We should be asking for more efficient cameras, that's all. Isn't it? So, if you believe that the policeman's physical observation is better than CCTV camera, it may be true in some cases, but not in every case, because there are limitations on policeman's observation. The CCTV camera, on the other hand, records continuously.
There's a question here and then we'll go.
I would like to add to the question asked by my fellow friend. Do we need additional layer of protection and the safeguard for lawyers and journalists when for lawyers it violates attorney and client relationship when their phones are tapped, when journalists, when they are working, their sensitive information is being intercepted? Do we need separate kind of procedures apart from the citizens, or we need to have the same safeguards to them? Are they equal, or they should be given separate layer of procedures, safeguard?
Well, gentlemen, that's a matter of opinion. Personally, if you ask me that question, why do we require greater protection? No, even if you think that greater protection is required, you must first define what degree of greater protection is, to what extent it's required. Unless you come out clearly with what is that protection you are thinking of, I will not be able to answer your question. See, the protection of a professional, journalist or a lawyer, is also subject to larger public interest, isn't it? Yes.
The last question, because I'm told that we have to wrap up.
So, Justice Chalmeshwar, in the judgment of Justice Puttaswamy, the Supreme Court laid down a three-pronged test. But when it came to actually testing out that the criteria for right to privacy in the Pegasus case, in the petitions filed in the Supreme Court paid no notice to those petitions. So, do you think there is a need for another authoritative ruling by the Supreme Court?
Another authority?
Do you think there is a need for another authoritative ruling by the Supreme Court listing out the circumstances in which right to privacy would be protected by the state? Because the data protection bill, most people here, I think that the government would be given too much leeway in that bill. So there might not be protection of privacy in that bill. So should the Supreme Court step in again to...
One more judgment, how does it help? If a 9-judge judgment of the Supreme Court did not help you, help you in the sense the citizen, one more judgment, how is it going to help anybody in this country? Question is not number of judgments. Question is one of the commitment to the values of the Constitution. If that is lacking on the part of the various organs of the state, any number of judgments will not improve the situation.
Thank you very much. I think there was a question for Professor
In fact,
Sinha.
I'll add an extra one statement. My friend Ms. Prakash Singh went to the Supreme Court some 14 years back. Your first case was 14 years back. And then Supreme Court laid down the principle as to how to choose the Directors General of Police in various states. The judgment, to my mind, was very clear as to what is to be done. If you read the judgment, it will be clear. At least the lawyer friends know it. Notwithstanding that judgment, in the last 15 years, the guidelines given by Mr. Prakash Singh's case were flouted more number of times than they were followed. What could we do about it? Ultimately, if the organs of the state do not have that respect for the system, nothing can be done. Sorry? What is the parliamentary action option? See, parliamentary accountability depends upon the awareness of the people. When people in the parliament vote on party lines, what is the option available there? Yes, in theory, that is the first audit. Parliamentary audit is the first audit of the executive action. But ultimately, what is happening in the party system, that audit fails. They simply vote on the basis of the party diktats. And now it has a constitutional protection, 10th schedule. If you don't vote in accordance with the whip, you lose your membership.
Thank you. Thank you, Justice Chelumeshwar, for those very insightful responses. I think Professor Sinha is saying that she's going to respond to you over tea because we are told that we are running out of time. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Vipul or Radhika. Yes, Radhika. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, and all of our panelists for that really rich and insightful discussion. And I would like to thank my colleagues at Common Cause and CSDS and the research team, as well as the FGD participants, the police officers who gave us time for the interviews, and all of you who have come here today. Thank you so much. The report is available on the Common Cause and CSDS website, and I would request you all to join us for tea outside.